Okay, welcome to chapter 2, film form. Now, one disclaimer about these slides. I think there's a typo, for example, on this one. I don't know where that W came from. I imported these over from PowerPoint into this special program that I use to turn them into YouTube videos, and I kind of think, let me move this over. I kind of think that some stuff got messed up. So there's a typo or two in here. And I'm not quite sure. I could try and fix it in PowerPoint, but if I did, is that really going to transfer over? Will it just get screwed up again when I import it again? I don't know. I'm not technically that swift, so I'm just bear with me. This one's got typos, and I don't know how they happened, is the bottom line. But oh well, we'll move on. I'm going to be reading these slides, which I know is a drag, but I'm going to read them and then I'll kind of explain afterwards. I have to read them for the vision impaired among us. So, this slide says, film form, we bring something to all artwork because we have a certain set of experiences that is unique only to us. So we experience art in different unique ways. What do I mean by that? I mean that you, when you watch a film, are not having the same experience as, say, the person sitting next to you. Because the person sitting next to you is thinking, hey, that guy up on the screen reminds me of my uncle. And you're probably not thinking that because they're a perfect stranger and you don't know their uncle, right? So sometimes these things that are impacting the way you experience films can be predicted by a director, and that's what we're talking about in this chapter. But sometimes, as in the uncle thing, no director said, this guy's going to remind some people of their uncle. That he can't anticipate that, right? So but it doesn't mean that all of those things aren't part of film form. The chick sitting in the theater having that experience, with her uncle, thinking of her uncle, that is still part of film form, and we'll talk about that too. Our brains naturally attempt to find and unify form in everything. This has been shown through countless tests. Our brains are built to analyze and built to figure things out. And so we are constantly trying to find film form when we watch a film because we're constantly trying to unite things. And when we get to experimental week, actually, it's for some people it's very frustrating because films are not necessarily supposed to tell a story. So they're frustrating to you if you're watching them trying to make a story because it doesn't congeal, artwork cues us to perform certain activities, and these cues are a system. So, for example, if you have a film shot of a person thinking, then you see a wavy soft focus dissolve to another shot of somebody on a desert island, and you come back, wavy shot to the person thinking. You understand that person is thinking of someone on a desert island. So, those cues of the wavy soft focus are part of the cue that lets you know, okay, now we're going into this person's mind. So you see, there is a certain language to film that you can sort of study. That's kind of the point of film studies, so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel to tell a story in a film. There are certain things that we all understand, and we can learn these cues. So, for example, do you find yourself ever not finishing a book because you can't get into it? Well, that's kind of what this chapter is talking about. It's how is the viewer engaged? Are you being engaged? Are you not being engaged? And how are you being engaged? So you can either get into a film or not, and how you go about engaging and hooking that viewer is the subject of this chapter and the next one to a certain extent. And because these techniques are not necessarily very visual, they involve manipulating the way your brain is involved, the way your brain understands a story. And so it can make these two chapters very difficult to get through. I've broken this particular lecture up into 3 separate things. So take it in small bites. Do your reading in small bites, and don't get too frustrated. If you're still confused and stuff, you can always email me. Hopefully, we're going to be going over the material in enough ways that at some point the light bulb will go on in your brain and you'll get it. But if you don't, you can always email me. And if you don't at all, you know what? Here's the thing. We're going to be moving on to very visual things. So don't give up hope. Don't think you have to drop the class, because this is just 2 chapters, really. Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about this clip from Forrest Gump. Let's see. I'm going to try and play it. Turn down the volume. As much as I love the volume on these clips, I'm not sure how they get fed back. Like, I'm not sure if we're gonna get feedback because of the microphone, is what I'm saying. Trouble speaking English sometimes. But we've all seen Forrest Gump, right? And what are we watching? We're watching a montage, right, of Forrest running. What does this montage? Montage is part of the language of film. It's a way of doing what? Condensing time, basically. So how is this clip functioning in this film? It's condensing time. It's breaking it down. And so there's usually a reason for these things. You know, the director only has you for a couple of hours. He can only make you sit in a seat for a couple of hours before you lose patience or have to go to the bathroom or have to, come home because you weren't setting out on a 6-hour adventure. You were setting out on a 2-hour adventure. So in 2 hours, you have to really condense a story down, especially if you're telling somebody's entire life story. So I guess that's my point, is that's what montages do. They condense time down. And that is part of film form. But you have to understand what a montage is, kind of. I mean, imagine if you were an early filmmaker and you were trying to figure out, how am I going to tell a story in 2 hours? Oh, I'll just show, little snippets of some, much longer bit. And people will understand, I hope. That was really all they had, was hope back in the early days of film. But today, we all kind of sort of speak the language of film. And, you don't have to push the envelope too far. All right. So film form refers to 2 things. When we use that term, film form, it means narrative elements referring to the film story. For example, an escaped lunatic, and there's a typo here too, and I don't know why, is on the loose, and a teenage girl is at home alone for the weekend. Okay? It's a pretty simple premise, right? Teenage girl home alone, escaped lunatic. They're going to cross paths. That's a given. So, and that's a given for, like, everybody expects that, kind of. So those are the actual narrative elements, right? It's A, B, C. A leads to B, leads to C, right? Stylistic elements are things like camera movement, color, music. And music cues us to react in so many places in horror films. So let's say that teenage girl is walking into her brightly lit house and we hear very grim music, right? We are led to believe that something bad is going to happen. So we all know that. It just impacts us, and we all have this sense of dread as she enters her house. And we'll talk about horror techniques in a minute. Now you can choose to do a couple of things there. You can choose to have nothing happen, which makes that can kind of like wear on a viewer if they're held in suspense without the payoff too many times. You can choose to, just have her walking through the dark house, never turning on a light, which happens in every horror film. Why do first thing I do when I come home, turn on a dang light, man. I don't go strolling through my whole house in the dark. That's ridiculous. And a good way to stub your toe or trip over something. So, but in horror films, they do it all the time. So you can have her walk in, and then you could keep people in suspense for a while and then have like the escaped lunatic jump out with a knife, right? That's one way of doing it. That would be suspense, when you hold people, when you avoid giving the payoff. What if you had that grim music and you had her walk through her house with the lights off, and then all of a sudden she flips on the light and all of her friends jump out and it's a surprise party? Well, that is surprise. That's very literally surprise in the movie, but it's also surprise for the viewer because you were led to expect something bad was going to happen and something fun is happening. So the point is, no matter what film you're watching, if you're watching a film that tells a story, a narrative film, these things are at work at the same time. One is narrative elements, that's the plot points, and one is stylistic elements. Those are the more artistic concerns. Now let's watch the next clip. Is a clip from Usual Suspects. In Usual Suspects, I'm going to play this right here. Oh, let me turn down the sound because this is a compilation clip that I put together of all the red and the green. Look at all this red and green. Like there's green gels, there's like an atrium. Are they in an atrium or a jail cell? I don't know. There's this red shirt here. It keeps coming up in The Usual Suspects. It's so pervasive that it had to be on purpose, right? This film really does have a color palette. Look at this garage with all the green lights and the red jacket and the red blood. Someone pointed out that the men wear red in the order in which they die. And I think that is true. So maybe that has something to do with something. In this room, the walls are kind of a brownish red, but they are definitely on the warm end of the color scale. And then you have this green pool table and another red shirt, in fact. It just keeps coming up over and over and over again. There must be some reason. I don't know what the reason is, but it pops up in some films. So even though you may not understand the reason, this would be part of film 4. It's so clearly on purpose because that doesn't happen by chance, is my point. Okay, so the next thing that we have to talk about is expectation. We talked a bit about that when creating suspense and surprise. But we expect things on a broader level to happen in a certain way based on our experiences. And those expected ways are called conventions. Okay? A happy ending is a convention. Most films have a happy ending of some sort. They have some sort of happy resolution, or at least not a miserable resolution, or at least not the completely like there is no ending. There is usually some wrap up, right? Those are all conventions. That's a convention. Spaceships in a science fiction film are a convention. And the cues within the work that we understand as conventions are part of film form, as are the conventions we are familiar with because of our real world experience. So, for example, we've read enough books, for example, to know that in many stories, if a hero sets off on an adventure, usually a male hero sets off on an adventure, eventually he gets to come home. Lots of times, the male person going off on the adventure is on the brink of adulthood, but not quite there yet. So they go off on their adventure, and that adventure turns them into a man, or in the case of the Lion King, a grown-up lion, or whatever. That is called a convention because we've seen it over and over and over again. And it's part of film form because a film can choose to engage and play upon that in certain different ways. And just for, your own excitement, I'm going to play this little clip, a TV series called The X-Files that you may not be familiar with. But as we watch this, I'll talk some more. Just look at this, watch this, experience it, and see what vibe you're getting out of this as you watch it. But anyway, back to our hero. When we engage the viewer, you can choose to let the hero come home in the end, which is very satisfying to most viewers. Or you can make them sad by not allowing the hero to return, or you can make them return to something sad, which is also sad. like in Star Wars. Luke Skywalker has to come home and finds out, his uncle and the whole farm thing is, trashed. Anyway, either way, the way a viewer feels is typically predicted by the director. It's not a surprise to him. It's not a surprise when everyone busts out the tissue at the end of Old Yeller. When Old Yeller dies, every single person in that theater starts crying, man. Starts super crying. Why? Because it's freaking sad when Old Yeller dies. But it wasn't like that surprised the director. So that makes it part of film form. What you feel is part of film form. Form is a tool in the director's toolbox that can be used to manipulate the viewer. And that is a lot about what we are talking about in this chapter. Now, were you watching this? Watch this X-Files clip. Now, X-Files is not a movie, obviously. It is a television show. But in every X-Files I ever watched, it follows these two like FBI agents that like investigate the unexplainable, I guess the way I would explain the TV series. But anyway, in every single X-Files, it's a little bit spooky because they're, investigating the unexplained. And they are just the classic pair of people that every single place they go into that's spooky, they never turn on a light. They get out their flashlights and they flash those around, and everything is very dark and very dimly lit. And it's like, you know what? There's power there because there's a microwave at work. Why can't someone turn on a light? Anyway, I show you that because those are all conventions. Those are all part of film form. And that lighting is part of film form, and the vibe that you're getting from this clip is film form. It's all film form. And that wraps up this section of the lecture.